Me. We are recording this because we want to make sure that all the universities get an opportunity to hear the information that is going to be presented on this call. So say hi to everybody. We'll send this around afterwards, and if you've got any other team members that didn't get to see this, feel free to share it as you like. It'll be an unlisted link on YouTube, but they're welcome to it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get into things. So this is meant to just kind of be a bit more of a follow-up to RE+, but also some information that I think or the team thinks would be really relevant to help you get moving on your projects. But before we get too far, we'd like to just make sure everybody knows each other. And I think most of you are at RE+, so I think you all know each other. But it'd be good just to go around the room and say hi. I'm going to start and then I'll pass it to the next person in my Zoom window. So the next person will do the same. So I'm Remy Pengel. I'm the Executive Director of Repowering Schools. You all know me, and I'm going to pass it to Ian.
Ian Baringold, I think I met all of you, but Ian Baringold, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'm also heavily engaged in repowering schools, but I've been doing hybrid power system design for too many years to think about. And I'll pass to Jacob. He's the next down the list.
Hi, I'm a mechanical engineer and I'm part of the UMass Amherst group. Sam, go next.
Hey, I'm Sam, and I am from JMU and worked a little bit with Case this summer and am here to just kind of help Remy out, and Dr. Miles out with getting some information. And then it's going to go to Sohad.
Hi everyone, I'm Sohad Abouelzeid. I am assistant professor at Appalachian State University. By major, I'm a doctor in energy and electrical engineering, and yeah, that's clean energy is what I do every day with students. I'm going to pass it to Jim because he's next on my screen. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Jim LeGrant from UMass Amherst. I'm one of the instructors for our senior capstone design project, of which this is part of. This will be our second year working with Repower, and glad to be back. Let's see. Grania, you're next.
Hi, I'm Grania. I'm also part of the UMass Amherst team. Yeah, don't have really much else to add. I'm going to pass it to Duncan and Joey.
I'm Duncan. I'm part of Appalachian State University. I'm a graduate student in renewable energy engineering. And yeah.
Same thing here. Well, not really. I'm Joey, undergrad in sustainable technology, and then I'll be working on my master's in appropriate technology.
Then we're going to pass to Jacob.
I went earlier, so I'll pass it over again. I'll pass it to Jake.
How you doing? I'm from UMass. I'm on the fabrication lead for our wind and solar educational system. I'll pass it over to Sam. I don't know if Sam went or if everyone already went.
Sam already went. I think Charles is the only one left. Is that right?
I'm the only one left. How about that? Charles, I don't know who I'm with, but I'm with Repowering Schools. Let's put it that way. And it's funny. Ian says he's been doing this forever. It was Ian's job that I tried to get when he transitioned from grad student to full NREL person. So Ian and I have been bumping into each other and playing with each other for decades on this, and it's been quite a trip. It's really fun.
Awesome. Well,
I hired both of us.
So. Did hire both. True. 2 for 1.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here on the call. I wanted to start the call by I appreciate everybody who you guys all got to come out to RE Plus. I really hope it was a worthwhile event. I know many of you, if not all of you, filled out the post-event survey and gave us some really good feedback, but I thought this could be just a good time to just, get some in-person feedback on how you thought the event was and anything that you learned, you really nuggets that you took away from the conference. So I'm not going to do this real formally. Just kind of let people chime in where they'd like to share something.
Can I start? Because I learned something so valuable. And it has a little bit of an anecdote, and it has to do with being overwhelmed at conferences. And that conference was freaking overwhelming. It was so ginormous. I know I did not find 70% of that space. And many of us in the industry started back when there were 1,000 people, and you might know 300 of them. And it was all your friends, and it was just like this cool little community. And now you show up and there's 30,000 people and you don't know 10 people, it's like, and so I found that I was really depressed after the first afternoon on the floor. I was like overwhelmed and depressed. And then I sat down with you guys and I said, you know what you need to do? You just need to talk to the first person you bump elbows with and just break the ice. And I took my advice the next day. And I had a ball. So that was what I took away was that people, yes, it's overwhelming. If you went to find out about batteries, how would you decide between the 8,500 battery suppliers or panel providers or whatever it was? That's what made me upset, is because I just didn't know. I get stuck at a candy machine, right? I can't decide what to eat. So it was so horrible for me. But once I broke the ice and I was just like, oh, forget it. Just talk to anybody you want. First person, there's no way to know what the right person is to talk to. It's about just breaking the ice. So hopefully you guys had the same experience and were able to kind of have fun.
Awesome. It was a very overwhelming conference. So anybody else have any nuggets that they took away with them? Anything in particular that was awesome?
Well, I had never really been at a conference before, and let alone something of that size, really. So it was just really kind of helpful to like get practice with like networking and like talking to people across the industry, just because I'd never done that. And I think that really helped me kind of get a better like understanding of how, like, if an opportunity like this presents itself in the future, to like be more like mentally prepared, I guess. So yeah.
Awesome. Did you guys, I have a bunch of pictures here, and a lot of them are, well, some of them are from your meet and greets and some of them are from the job fair. So does anybody have any specific takeaways from either a meet and greet or the job fair? Did anybody get a job or a good lead on a job? Were you looking for a job? I don't know. Nobody, you guys are quite a bunch today. Did you enjoy the meet and greets? Were they helpful at all? I mean, I know the companies that you met with were not maybe super relevant to your project at hand. But I was hoping to give you an idea of the breadth and scope of the industry and the folks that work in that industry. So I hope you got to meet some interesting people, even if they weren't going to help you with your project. Was there anyone in particular that you enjoyed meeting?
Duncan and Joey. Come on, you have a lot to say, Duncan and Joey. It's only for me. The speech is for me, share.
I thought it was really I guess reassuring might be the right word, just to see that many people interested and engaged in the industry. Because I know just like as a grad student, having done renewable energy focus as my undergrad, like I was a little worried at first, but then getting to see how many people are just excited to be in the industry and getting to do the meet and greets where they're like, this is like my favorite job I've ever had. Like those kind of conversations, even if they weren't as more technical, like that was just reassuring to see and make me more excited to be involved in the industry in general.
Well, that's good to hear. There definitely was a lot of energy there.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna talk on behalf of my third student who's not here today because he has something, which is our international Nigerian student, Jijioke. You've met, yeah. He was super happy. He was thrilled. He's doing his research now, his master's about renewable energy-based microgrids, and I'm his supervisor. And when he saw that live demonstration of the microgrid and the exhibition, he was, really happy. He came, and of course, I want to share that 3 of them did a very, I'd say, lovely presentation. They're taking now my electric grid class, and I asked them to do a presentation about their trip. And they shared a lot of this wonderful experience, and he told the students about the live microgrid, and how he, asked like tons of questions to the people there. So it was, of great benefit for him. So, yeah.
That's wonderful to hear. Well, thanks for sharing that story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I don't want to belabor this. Like I said, I appreciate you guys filling out the surveys. And if you haven't filled out the survey and you don't know what I'm talking about, let me know and I will send it to you. But that's been really helpful. And honestly, for me, what came out of this for me was, this is what Repowering Schools does. And this is what Repowering Schools should be doing for more college students. Because I really felt like I was being super helpful and impactful. I'm hoping that by setting all of that programming up, that it made you feel more welcomed and comfortable and taking on a 40,000 person industry trade conference. And I really think that that is where Repowering Schools can play a big role. And so we are planning to do this again at DWEA and again at Clean Power. In some way, shape, or form, including the student symposium as well. So, so just know that it really inspired me to keep with this and to continue to offer these programs to you guys, because what I saw, it looked like you guys were engaged and enjoying yourselves and learning a lot. So, anyway. Enough of that. Thank you for everything in that sense. The next thing I wanted to do was to kind of just hear where everybody's at with their projects. And if you have decided on a client, or if you at least know your project details, like what you're trying to power or which system components you're planning to use. Are you going to use wind, solar, and storage, or just a couple? So I just thought it would be interesting to go around the room. We only have 3 of the universities here, but it still would be a great place to start. So did any of the students from UMass want to give us a quick update on anything on the client side of your project?
Yeah, so we originally had that like a picnic table idea where we were going to power it with solar and wind power, or solar and wind. We were going to have a light on top and then have it power a charging station. But we met with the Amherst High School, a couple of the teachers there, and they kind of steered us away from that direction. So what we ended up agreeing on was 2 different systems that are very similar. It would be a solar powered system and a wind powered system that would be adjustable, like angles and positioning, whatever is like XYZ and rotational for the students to get more of a hands-on experience of what they're actually doing. And then they would be seeing the differences in efficiencies on those different adjustments.
And what would it be powering, or is it just going to like have like a display of watts, or are you going to be like, how are they going to see the difference?
Yeah, so they really didn't want it. They really just wanted it to be like almost like a one-time thing for like a specific class, so they can really dial in on the thing instead of having it be something that's just outside, like powering a lamp or something, because they have a specific class, environmental action class, where they kind of talk about these kind of things. So they kind of wanted to really specialize like a few classes on this actual thing. So it's not actually powering anything, but it would be have a storage unit where they would be able to see how much power would be stored over a certain amount of time, and then compare the two between the solar and the wind and see the efficiencies between the two.
Interesting. Well, it sounds like there'll be definitely a big data display portion to that so that they can understand how the electrons are flowing around. Very cool. Well, I'm glad that you listened to your client and adjusted your design. That's very cool. Anybody else from US want to add to that before we hand it off to the next university?
Yeah, I guess I'll just add, today we actually went and visited the 9th grade ecology class that we're like making the system for. So we got to like meet with the students and kind of like be a 9th grader for like an hour, just kind of see like where they're at and like what their capabilities are. So like that was really fun to see. Yeah, no, and like one of the teachers just really emphasized that they really like being able to like get their hands on things and being able to just, like see. I think that a big part of our thing is going to be like the interactive bit. And then like Jacob was saying, like some sort of like app or monitor where they can see for themselves, like how the power output is changing. And then they also will be able to do like calculations with that and like see, the difference in numbers and stuff like that.
Is it going to be mainly like just sitting in a classroom, or is it something they want to be able to like roll outside, like for solar, to be able to like roll it outside and like see like on a, December day, how does this efficiency compared to when we bring it out in May? Or is it all inside?
It's gonna live inside for the majority of the year, except there's like a 2-week period when they do this unit twice a year. So they'll be able to like bring it outside, and they have like a lot of field space outside. So they'll be able to bring it outside during the 2-week unit, and then it'll live inside for the rest of the year.
Okay. Well, I'll be challenging on the wind side of things, but we're here to help. And anyway, you need that. Awesome. Well, I hope you're taking lots of pictures and enjoying being a 9th grader. That sounds like super, super fun. Sam, do you have any details yet from the JMU side of things on what your client is and what you guys are doing?
Not really, to be honest. Me, Steven, Georgia, and Nick kind of really like after our E+ didn't have much instruction and didn't really like, I guess it's kind of on hold for now because everyone else has their own things going on and everyone's very busy, but nothing really new to add. So yeah.
Okay. Well, you and I can meet another time if you need some guidance, if that'd be helpful. So we can get you rolling. I think we have a client for you. So I think we have like 2 clients for you that are like battling it out. But so for those of you who don't know me, other than being the executive director of Repowering Schools, I also work at James Madison University with these students and our Center for the Advancement of Sustainable Energy. And I reach out to K-12 schools. And so, Sam, there's a school, I believe in Elkton. I think it's the middle school, but I'd have to check back in. And then I also recently did some work with the Massanutten Regional Governor's School, which is located in Mount Jackson. And they are in the midst of building a makerspace to house the governor's school, because they moved to a new location. Anyway, the long story short is that they would like to power it with wind and solar. And that might be a little bit more of a long-term project that maybe would be something to get you guys involved in. And that would be more like grid tied. They probably wouldn't need storage. It could be a very different type of demo project, more on this order of like a wind for schools, like SkyStream, and maybe even 1,000 or so watts of solar. I mean, they've got a lot of space, so that could be a bigger project. But the Elkton Elementary School or middle school one, I think, would be. But we should get you in touch with the teachers so that you can figure out who your client is and what they want to do with their thing and visit the school.
Okay, and then is this also with Steven in Georgia as well?
Yeah, this would be the client for your team.
Nick.
So however you're gonna approach that. But we can talk offline in more detail about that. Okay, and Duncan and Joey, do you guys have a client? Because you guys are doing it right on campus, right?
We're pretty close to campus, but we're not doing it on App State's campus. We're looking at Caldwell Community College's campus.
Oh, that's right.
And so we met with their executive director again, I think last week, to sort of check in with them and see if we're still good to go through with the plan we wanted. And so they had a couple options. We were looking at some picnic shelters like that are outside. There's one outside the culinary department and one outside of the nursing program. And so they're there like for 8 hours a day or longer, but don't have a good place to sit. So they're looking at getting those. So we'd like to equip them with solar and maybe wind. So they have places like charge your phones that work outside. And then also what we might focus in on now, as they had pointed out, more the near term, a big sign it's out there parking lot, but it's a really popular sunset location for everyone in the Boone area. And so people will drive and the whole parking lot will fill up with cars like right before sunset. And so they have a billboard out there that they want to have set up for lighting, and then maybe like have charging stations. And then we were thinking about doing like an electric bike charging station by that sign. And so if we had solar on the roof of that like billboard, and then we were looking at doing a small wind turbine sort of behind it, like out of the way, but it would be kind of like not covering the
Visible, but-
sunset spot for the view, but like enough that people could engage with it. And it's so it wouldn't block their pictures, but if they want to take a picture of the wind turbine in the sunset, they could sort of have
Yeah.
that
Nice.
engaging area. So we were hoping to do some sort of monitoring system so people can engage with that even further for them. One issue we're having right now though is we're for the turbine, we're debating whether we should do like a guy wire turbine because it'd be easier to put up, or if we should do like a little concrete base because it'd have a smaller footprint. But then we have to worry about doing like concrete and stuff. But it is a smaller area we're trying to look at for the turbine. So I didn't know if anyone had any advice for what to look at there.
I would weigh in on that. The guy wires are really easy to catch with a lawnmower.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're worried about.
Yeah, I mean, they are so great. So all you have to do is if you do guy wires, which is super efficient, it's a very good way to do it. You just have to make sure that you have a way to protect them so that nobody trips over them. It's really a sad thing when you lose your wind turbine to a lawnmower.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. I don't. Do you have any advice for protecting the guy wires? I guess just like setting aside like a little
Like
don't
plant-
walk in zone.
Yeah,
or-
planting a hedge or something like that, something
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I've seen
Yeah.
them fenced in, like the telephone guy wires, they use these big yellow covers that make them a little bit more visible.
Yeah,
Fencing all around it is kind of a pain, but it's a thing.
especially because it's like sort of a nice field area that we were looking at. So if it would kind of suck to isolate that area. But
How tall are you thinking?
I don't think terribly high because I don't think the load we have would be too strong. I mean, so we were thinking, I don't know, 35 meters.
You probably want guy wires to be cheap
Yeah,
then. Yeah.
thinking too.
Though if the kind of the beauty of the place is important, then looking at a monopole tower, those are much cleaner, simpler, more photogenic. But they are more expensive and require a bigger foundation.
Okay.
So that's certainly part of the trade-off that
Yeah,
you're gonna want to look at.
You're thinking 30, you said 35 feet or 35 meters?
Feet.
Okay.
that is a lot taller than I meant to say.
And no, that's fine. Both are great. I just was curious.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, that sounds fantastic. And I love the sunsetting idea. And I'm hoping that there would be like an educational kiosk, right? Because that's a great opportunity for some community engagement around wind energy and solar. So awesome.
Yeah.
One thing to consider, I mean, not to put anybody at risk, but there's a company, Rohn, ROHN,
Mhm.
and they make lattice towers and they make guide lattice towers. But if you can go short, they can actually be pretty stable without guy wires up to 20 feet or something like that.
We
for
have a
small-
Rowan tower that's 120 feet tower. It's not guide.
Well, that's because you have an SSV as self-supporting. So I'm thinking like a 25G, there are ways to do it cheap.
Mhm.
But Ian would say, well, they look a little industrial, don't they? Because they're
And the
they're not
birds
pretty
like to
small.
nest in them.
I
That's
know,
like the
I know.
first rule of don't kill birds is don't build a lattice tower.
I know.
But
know.
small wind, it's different. So
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. the guy wires are probably more likely to kill a bird than the lattice tower is.
Or the turbine.
Yeah.
That was one of our problems. We were testing this turbine at NREL, was keeping the poop off of the tail, because the birds would just sit on the tail, poop all over the turbine while it was running, you know? It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, I feel you.
Oh.
Well, awesome. I'm hoping that the other teams are in a good spot as you are. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ian to talk a little bit about hybrid system modeling. So as you guys are digging into your projects, maybe some resources that could be helpful.
Great. So thanks, everybody. So I'm going to go over this pretty quickly, but happy to answer questions. And again, it's a little hard to kind of judge exactly where all of you are in the development process. I'm going to focus this conversation around kind of a simplified design process, but looking at a design process and then the things that we need to be thinking about. And then Charles is going to talk after this is going to talk a bit more about kind of how do you assess the resources that are available to you. So, okay, next slide. Or can I control them? Remy?
Oh, I don't even see this one on
Did
the slide deck. Oh, that'll work.
Is it not progressing?
We see something different now.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the first step in the process is basically what we were just talking about. So you have something that you're trying to do, and in some cases it's a kiosk. In some cases, it's a little kind of educational system for a school, and we go through this kind of process of systems options analysis to really understand what you are trying to do. Okay, so what you're trying to do, what services are you trying to provide, and then what resources you have available to you. Some of them are pretty straightforward. Do you have sun? Do you have water? Do you have that kind of stuff? But the ones that people don't necessarily think that much about, and we'll get into a little bit, are what kind of equipment do you have on site? The ones for the school that you're talking about doing it, is it something that a teacher will have to move outside on their own? In which case you want to make it light, or it needs to fit on a dolly so that they can move it out. It needs to, if you have to take it apart to be able to store it in a room or something of that nature, what tools do you need to be able to do that? And does the teacher have access to the tools to be able to do it? So you really need to understand what you're trying to do, and then exactly what the resources that you have available to do that, whether they're very simple or whether they're more complex. And that is really critical when you're looking at the design of power systems, for things that we're talking about here, or for the student from Africa if you're trying to put in a system in Africa. So you really have to understand what resources you have. And so the options analysis is really diving into how do you optimize around what you're trying to do and where you are starting from. And so you go through this development process. Next slide.
Did it move?
No. There we go.
Okay.
And then you delve into the technology. So when you kind of talk to people about you're designing your system, everybody wants to jump to what the project is. Which, am I using solar? Am I using wind? What is the technology? But when you get to this level, it's really looking at what technologies, the quantities, and the combinations. But again, it's driven by what you're trying to do. So two very simplistic power system designs, but they can perform very different things. And one is DC based and one is AC based. And so how much power are you producing? So the whole idea of project design is getting into this, what technologies you want to pull together to make it work. All right, pop to the next one. And so you go through this design process where you do this kind of iterative development of collecting some data, analyzing it, looking at the results, refining your data, doing more analysis, likely doing some sensitivity studies around what your design ends up looking like. For example, if it is a year that doesn't have very much sun, cloudy year, or if a monsoon season or something of that nature, the design that you develop might not be very robust. And so looking at these sensitivity studies about what happens if the load's a little bit more, a little bit less, and things of that nature. So even once you get a design, you want to do these iterative studies around that before you kind of get to the end. And then you do this evaluate and you rank your options, because you can come up with one that's a lot more expensive than the other. And is that a problem or is that not a problem? So it's this kind of design process is a bunch of studies that keep on improving as you get better data and a better understanding of what you're doing and the sensitivities of your design to the conditions that you're likely to face. Okay, next slide. So once you start getting into these design requirements, these are the things you kind of at a highest level you really need to look at. So you need to look at your loads and what you're powering. You need to look at the renewable energy resource, and Charles is going to get into that. You have to look at your space. So what are you doing around space? This question of funding and revenue is really critical as you do this development, and then institutional considerations that you're going to want to get into. This is a picture of a power system down in Chile that powers a community. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll walk through each one of these at again, a pretty high level. So looking at the loads, the energy that you're going to use, but building this over the kind of variations that you're going to get from a daily perspective, weekly or seasonal, because all of those will have impacts on your design. Kiosk, as an example, pretty good for solar, because if it's being used in the middle of the day, you have sun during the middle of the day, but in the middle of the night, you're not going to, people are not going to be using it. If you're looking at lighting, on the other hand, well, the lighting is going to be in the evening. You're not going to need the lighting in the middle of the day. And so understanding that kind of daily variation of when your loads, when you're going to need to provide that power is important. From a weekly perspective, do the weekends impact things a lot from a loading perspective? So a school, as an example, will have more loads during the school days, and on the weekends, the loading will probably be different. So different people using the facility and probably at different times. And then is there seasonal variation? Again, in school application, in the middle of the summer, the loads are probably going to be different than during the school year, and the usage is going to be different. What kind of load growth are you expecting, or a decrease in load over time? If we're doing charging of things, generally speaking, the energy needs keep going up. Okay, so what is that going to look like? Because you don't want to design a system that meets needs now but won't meet needs in 2 years. So what is that longer term energy profile? The quality of the service ends up is pretty important. So what are the characteristics? Are we charging cell phones, in which case it's all you need is 5 volts, or is it going to be something that you need to plug AC into? You're going to need to plug a computer into, which means you need higher quality power, and you need a lot more of that power. And then also, what's important about reliability? What happens if someone plugs in their phone and there's no charge in the battery? Does it matter? Okay, so as compared to a light, a safety light, or a light at a railroad crossing, or something of that nature, where the reliability is critical, and so you're going to want to over design to make sure that you can meet that reliability. And then the last thing from a load perspective is this: kilowatt hours versus kilowatts. So a car charger is a perfect example. Not tons of energy, but when you plug in that Tesla, it needs a lot of energy right now. And so how do you balance how much energy you need over the long term compared to the power that you need out of the device at this instant, whatever that instant might be? And is that in the middle of the day or is it in the middle of the night? So understanding that relation to how much energy you need and the power to meet the requirements that you're trying to provide. All right, next slide. Charles is going to dive into the resources in a lot more detail, how you get those, but at the 60,000 foot level, these questions here are important. So what resources are available, sun, wind, things of that nature? How do they change over time? And how does that change relative to your load? So from a daily, seasonal, and to a degree annual. Wind wind and solar is a critical thing around these because in kind of para-urban environments, buildings get built up and the local wind resource tends to go down. In addition, trees grow. And so in a place right now where at this year, it might not be shaded, in 5 years, it might be shaded because the trees are growing in and around the area. So how is your resource availability going to change over time? And then what are the needs for macro versus micro site assessments? And Charles will be looking primarily at this macro, kind of what is the resource in my area, but for wind specifically, what's around it and how is that going to impact what the local wind resources are. Okay, spatial layout, the next key thing. And I know I'm going through this quickly because I want to give time for Charles and then some Q&A. So lots of stuff in regards to space. How much space do you have where you are? If you're doing a kiosk, does the solar have to be on top of the kiosk or not? Can you spread the system out so that you can put solar on the ground? So how does the space you're allowed for your design impact the final design? Ends up being really critical, and therefore you need to know where it's going to be able to understand how you design your system to be able to do it. This funding thing is also a critical thing because it determines how you build your system. In a lot of the cases, the ones that you're building, no one is collecting money from these things. And so maybe if most of the money is coming from grant funding, you want to over-design the system so that it doesn't have to be maintained very often, and you understand what that maintenance requirement is, because there's not going to be a source of revenue to keep the system operating over time. So how does that funding mechanism impact the design of your power system and the components that you choose to incorporate into it? All right, institutional considerations is the last one that I identify here. And this really gets into the social dynamics of the systems that you're putting in. A good geeky engineer can design a perfect system that will never work. And so when it never works, it's always the social issues that you run into. And especially in school applications, we've seen this over and over and over again. So what is the level of maintenance or the skills of people to be able to maintain the systems? And do you want to design the system so that basically anybody can maintain it? And that's stuff like fuses that are easily accessible, or things that are plug and play. So if a component breaks, you can go onto Amazon and buy another one and just stick it in, and you don't need to open a box. You don't need to do anything to be able to do that maintenance if the skill set of the people who will be doing the maintenance is relatively low. If their skill sets are high, then you can get a little bit more complicated in your design, and it will still work over the long period of time. Different responsibilities and an understanding of those is critical. Is a teacher going to be the one who maintains this, or is it going to be the facilities guy or gal who is going to be doing it? And is that understood up front so that as things change, you don't lose that maintenance capability? So teachers change roles quite a lot more frequently than school maintenance staff do. And so are you engaging with the maintenance staff, or are you engaging with the science teacher? Because the science teacher is probably going to be there for a couple of years and then they're going to do something else. Obviously, it depends on the school. And so being able to have that consistency, and when you're designing your power system, you know who is going to be the one who really looks at it over time. And does that change seasonally? So the science teacher, as an example, might be perfect, been there for 20 years, never planning on going away, but they are not around all summer because they go off to Thailand or wherever it is over the summer. In which case you're not going to have any maintenance over the summer, and you need to design that into your thinking as you develop the power system needs. Security is another huge thing. So how do you design this to be secure? The photovoltaics go up on top of a canopy that you need a ladder to get up onto so people can't take them. Again, something that is really important everywhere, but if you get into the developing world, it becomes even more important. And then again, special needs and local beliefs. Again, as you look to develop these things internationally, local beliefs can really play a big role in what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So you have to take that into account as you develop these systems. Last but not least, once you have done all of that, then you actually get into this question about using analytical tools to design your power system. So all of that stuff that we've talked about, the whole kind of 10 minutes, none of that has actually been about designing your power system, getting kind of the analytical tool to design your power system. All of that is all the pre-stuff that you have to do to be able to do this. Now there's a bunch of ways to do it, and they can get really complicated or they can be really simple depending on how deep you want to get into it. Certainly, just little spreadsheets are perfectly fine looking at hourly energy balances of wind, solar, storage. You can do that pretty cleanly, and if you have energy storage, then an hourly energy balance is probably fine. Or you can go off and use these tools that can be pretty cool, but you can spend a lot of time kind of designing these tools or using these tools, figuring out how to use them right. But Homer is a fabulous one. I'm pretty sure they have a student license, but it's only for a shorter period of time. The REOP tool from NREL is another tool that you can use, and they have an online version for that one. And then we probably won't need them in the projects that you're talking about, but eventually you get into these power flow and dynamic design tools, which if you're designing larger power systems, you're going to want to be able to get into because you're looking at kind of more advanced controls as well as power flow. But at the sizes that everybody has been talking about here, you probably don't need to get into that level of design work. So that MATLAB and Simulink, again, all of this you can do in MATLAB and Simulink if part of the project is to gain experience around use of those tools. So there's nothing that keeps you from using them, but you don't necessarily need to get into it. Okay, so with that, hand it off to Charles to dive into wind resource, or to dive into resource assessment for wind and solar.
Skirt across the top of resource assessment. Yeah, let's go to the next slide, Remy, if you don't mind. So I was gonna, this is if these slides are in here. Next slide. There we go. Oh, that's funny. Might have to do a Control R, Command R, whatever it is to reset. Because there's new slides in there. Handful of them. So this first one is are we happy yet? Getting closer. This first one is Ian talked about sort of siting. So let's go to 16. So in terms of siting, this is just one of my favorite examples. Oops, next slide. There we go. This is a school over in Ohio, and it makes it look like, you know, if you go up one, Remy, it looks like there's all kinds of places to put a turbine. And oops, up the other direction. There we go. It looks like there's lots of room. And this is a constraint kind of concept. So when you think about siting, you look at something like this, you're like, lots of room. East side of the property, there's so many fields. The next slide shows you, okay, well, here's the drawing of actually what they have planned as they build out their school. Next slide, Remy. And you can see that the northeast corner is pretty full of fields. They've got a couple baseball fields they're going for, and soccer fields and things on the east side. You're like, okay, well, there's still some room up there on the north end. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide sort of shows you the constraints. And what you'll find here is that Fish and Wildlife in Ohio, because the Indiana bat issue, was like, you got to be 200 feet away. Next slide, Remy. You have to be 200 feet away. So that, or 1,000 feet away. So that was the setback. We had these little setbacks from properties. That's the pink, but the blue line is the Fish and Wildlife setback line. And when you're all done, you're allowed to put a wind turbine in deep in the infield, sort of basically where the batter is standing. That's where you can put the turbine. And so when we talk about constraints, that's just something to keep in mind, is that there's always a lot of people who have opinions around where things can and can't go. So that's the end of that citing example. Okay, next slide. So we'll jump right into the resource side of things. A little bit about wind maps. Wind maps are kind of a chain of models. There's these global reanalysis models, which are taking data from tens of thousands of points, airplanes, buoys, surface observation stations, boats, you name it, satellites, and they're stitching it all together into a global weather model, which has about a 20 to 30 kilometer resolution. But it's physics consistent, it's accurate, it is simply a physics-based model that joins all the observations. That's what reanalysis is. And then you take it the next step down, reanalysis forms the boundary condition for the next layer in, which is usually a weather research and forecasting model, which again is another physics consistent model with 60 different knobs on it for evapotranspiration rates, terrain, ground cover, urban settings, all these kinds of things that are going to affect the flow of air across, with the reanalysis forming the boundary condition for that model as it moves through. And the WRF model, the WRF, the wind research and forecasting, weather research and forecasting model, goes back and forth. It's usually a 4D VAR. It's like, it's looking backwards and forwards in time. It's assimilating data as it comes in from observations, and you end up with these crazy stable models. And then you get down to a couple kilometers. That takes you to 2 to 3 kilometers or so. If you want to get deeper than that, then you can bring in some sort of computational fluid dynamics model. And a lot of folks will use something like OpenFOAM because it's free. And you'd be surprised at how good you can get. You can get within about 1/10 of a meter per second compared to an observation over a non-full year. So 3 months, yeah, you can estimate the wind speed at any kind of any point on the earth within about 1/10 of a meter per second, because using this chain of models. So it's really, really accurate. Next slide. So the wind maps, where do you get these things? There's a few commercial systems out there still. Underwriters Laboratory has a nice one, the Wind Navigator, that was UL. NREL has a lot of free maps, and you guys are savvy enough to be able to take these maps and drape them in Google Earth over where you are and kind of get an inexpensive estimate of wind speeds down to about 20 kilometers, something like that, or 10 kilometers, even if they're a 200-meter map, meaning the resolution in this map on the right and the left, I think, are both down. They're both come out of AWS. So they were the underlying data set maybe at a couple hundred meters. The map is not infinitely high resolution. So that's why I'm like, you'll get to a couple kilometers, and that's probably good enough for your purposes. They are free. You're going to be tempted to use the one on the right, the 30-meter map, because that's what you're thinking is like, it's short. It's 100 feet. That gets me closer than 100 meters. 100 meters is pretty tall. And I'm going to say the downside of the 30-meter map, I mean, it's good for screening, but the downside of it is that you may believe it, right? And you have to be very careful, because these maps are using, land use data sets that may be a little out of date, or they don't identify a copse of tree that's less than, acres in size, all these kinds of things. So wind maps are better when you look at them as an advisory tool, as opposed to an actual number. And that's true for even things like Navigator. When you're dialing it in, you're getting a 200-meter number. You still have to take that with a grain of salt. And there's always something to be said for, well, let's just go above and do our micro sighting, where we actually look at obstructions, look at ground cover, look at various things to shear the wind speed down from a high level down to a local level. And that's the formula on the right, which is sort of the way of running it down this logarithmic curve and saying, okay, I understand I can estimate what the wind resource is at a lower level. Next slide. Oh, and before you leave that one, Remy, actually, there's a link at the very bottom. Primus if you give them a lat long, and you say, hey, I'm thinking about a little turbine, which you are, because this is the turbine we're using, they'll send you a free wind speed estimate for that location and maybe some advertising. Or you can use a wind map. Next slide. So what do you do with the wind speed? Well, the wind speed is then used, you can't just say, oh, it's 7 miles or 7 meters per second. What's the power at 7 meters per second? Multiply that times 8760. Like, you cannot do that. That's not how it works. Despite the fact that's how Ohio did it for years with their incentive program. That's how they did it. No, what you have to do is you have to say, okay, if I have a mean wind speed, what does that mean for a histogram of wind speeds? That's that bottom left one, that wind speed distribution. That whole distribution has a mean to it. And that's probably around 6 or 7 meters per second in this graph. And so that's how you use it. You have to say the mean wind speed times a skewness indicator, a shape factor that pushes the normal curve off to the left a little bit. That's how you do it. And then you say, what's the probability of any wind speed bin happening? And what's the power that I'm going to get out of that bin? And now you have a probability. You say, well, I'm probably going to get 800 hours at 200 watts and 1,000 hours at 300 watts and whatever it is, So that's how this math is done, where you take the wind speed bin, the probability of that wind speed times the power in that wind speed bin, and then sum that up. So the next one over, real quickly, the power curve, you guys have heard about them, but the test data is really important. So anybody who gives you a power curve, it should be a certified power curve, something that an independent body has verified works. And so that's that 61400-12. That's the standard that says this is how you test turbines. And it talks about the instrumentation and how long you have to do it and how you divide up your bins, 6.5 to 7 meters per second, that kind of thing, and how many minutes you need in each bin, all those sorts of things. So that's very important. Next slide. So to make it even easier, Mike Berge and our friends over at Berge Wind Power down in Norman, Oklahoma, they have an online calculator for you that you can download, and it is so sweet of them to make this accessible. So there's a little link down there, berge.com technical, and on the left-hand side, you see how to install owner's manuals down to the CAD performance models. And if you download one of those, the XL10 is an easy one, you get this thing in the middle. And the thing in the middle, oops, it's cut off, gives you the wind speed bins on the left side, the power, which you can then hack. You can put in the actual power from a power curve, and then the probability that when you put in the wind speed in the top left that comes off of a wind map, you're going to put in the height of the wind map that is shown as 100 there, and then the height of your actual turbine. Somewhere in here, there's I've cut it off so you can't even see it. I apologize for that. Anyway, you put in a map height and an actual hub height, and that's how it calculates for you. Next slide. So that gives you the gross output, and so this tool would do that for you. Just like anything, when you get a gross, you got to net it down, and there's a few things that in your estimate that are important. Number one is is it going to work all the time? Like every time to put the key in the lock and turn it, or the ignition, is your car going to start? Small wind turbines, they might start a lot of the time. They don't have, they do have faults for sure, but it's usually not the equipment that fails because they're so simple, right? If this air turbine doesn't work, it's not going to work tomorrow. There's no reset from the factory that somebody's going to do remotely. It's dead until you fix it, right? So you may as well assume that it's just going to work. Now what's going to net it out? Well, there's obstructions. So the wind speed that you get off of a wind map is assuming there's no obstructions or anything else. So here's a wind shade calculator. The best thing about this wind shade calculator, actually, if you go to this link that's on the bottom, there's going to be a little directory tree on the left. That's the best thing about this calculator. This is the Danish Wind Energy Association, and it has this sort of PhD in a box. So you could read this website and you will know everything there is to know about wind. It's insanely good. And this shade calculator tool uses the Pereira equation that is referenced in that -12 standard. And Pereira was an ag engineer in the Netherlands or Denmark, I can't remember, who did a lot of this early research. And this model, ironically, it's a simple model that has maybe 5 or 6 parameters that you put in, which is the relative height of you and the obstructions, the hub height and the obstruction, what's between the obstruction and the turbine, you know, is it trees, bushes, cars, whatever? And then how porous the obstruction is, all these kinds of things. This is actually the heart of WASP, which is, you know, sort of, it's an ancient wind estimation tool, but it's still, people use it as the gold standard. So this tool will allow you to plug in obstructions and then visualize the effect of those. And you want to do that by direction. So that's what this microsighting is all about. It's all about looking at obstructions. And now you kind of need a windrose to sort of say, well, I expect a certain amount of wind coming out of each direction, and do an assessment for each one of these things and come up with a total statement for all directions. That's the right way to do it. But, you know, for your purposes, you may or may not need to dig in that deep. Next slide. So here we're jumping into solar, and solar is a lot easier. It's pretty darn ubiquitous. In your area, you know, it's unlikely that it's going to change much over 100 miles. It's ridiculous, unless, of course, you're under a tree or not under a tree, or behind a building or not behind a building. So start from that perspective and just know that it's ubiquitous. Next slide. Then there are some tools that'll help you to estimate. And this is kind of what everybody uses. Now, it's not a fancy estimation tool, but I challenge you to find a solar design tool out there that, you know, like Helioscope or whatever, that doesn't have PV watts as its root source of information. It's kind of insane. So next slide. These are a couple shots that kind of show you that when you put in your lat long and you can plug in the DC system side, this is where you can say, I've got 0.6 kilowatts, right? And it'll spit out the gross again. So this gross over here gives you some seasonality to it, which is kind of nice. And here is where you can kind of say, well, how much energy do I expect in terms of kilowatt hours per day? And you're probably going to have a battery storage in your system. Therefore, you know, if you kind of think about it, you divide by 30, this monthly energy, divide by 30, that's going to be pretty darn close. And then you don't have to worry about it lining up with when you turn the light on. Just know that's going to happen in the same day or two. That's plenty fine. Next slide. And then the next thing is, okay, so how do you take your gross and turn it into sort of a net? You got to think about shadows, and you got to think about how often where your location is going to be in shadow. And know that if it's a tree that's casting that shadow, it doesn't mean that there's no power. There's scattered light everywhere. I've put panels underneath trees and gotten about 50% out of the panel. So just know that it's hard to turn off a solar panel. You actually have to cover it with, you know, a tarp or cardboard on top of the panel to get it to go dead on you. So do keep in mind that you're going to need that. Okay, next one. And I think that's actually it. So there's your solar and wind resource in a bottle in like 2 minutes. I guess the next slide, since we're over time now, we may want to just jump to that. Is that okay, Remy?
Yeah, I'm happy to move on. I did want to does anybody have any questions? I mean, that was a lot of information, but we'll send out the recording. You guys can listen to it again. If there's nothing pressing, the big thing that we wanted to do to kind of wrap this up is just to talk about the big next steps. And so, of course, the first thing is that we will have another one of these informational webinars. And I think we're going to aim for kind of late November, early December, because your design deliverable will be due at the end of the semester. And there's a couple of things we want to ask you guys about. Number one, what's the best way to get in touch with you and your team? So we've got 3 of you guys here. I didn't email any students. I just sent this invitation out to you guys, you faculty advisors. Would you like me to add all of your students to the distribution list, or is it just as easy for me to just send it to you and then you forward it on? So I just want to make sure.
Whatever you're comfortable with, everything works.
Yeah, I'm okay with forwarding it to my team.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about you students? Would you like to be in more direct contact, you know, with us? Do you mind going through your faculty advisor to get to us if you've got questions? I mean, I'm happy to take everybody's email address. I think I have everybody on this call. It's some of the other folks that I don't have, but I don't want to bombard you guys with emails if you don't want them.
It might be useful to get them directly, like as a student, just in case, but
Okay.
guess that's still whatever's easier for you.
Okie dokie. Well, that's easy enough. So the next question is, if we hold this next informational webinar, my thought was originally to focus that next informational webinar more on the technical document that's going to be your main deliverable. So maybe give you an example of a hybrid project and then maybe show you what some of the schematics and parse lists and costs that, you know, we put together for that project were, to see if that's helpful. But if you think there's like an actual technical content area that you think would be more helpful, like digging into some of the modeling or digging into something else, happy to find the right speaker to do that. I don't know if that's anything you could answer right now, but I'll throw it out there in case anybody's got some thoughts on something to dig into in the next call.
I mean, I don't want to take away what anyone else is thinking, but an example of, you know, like kind of what you're looking for is probably just the best thing I think would be to look at.
Okay. Well, I can.
Maybe
Yep.
we might be able to put an example together and share it with the team in the next month or so that they have time then to kind of format. And it's not like you have to, it's not like a tax form and you have to fill it out exactly as you see it, but it's just for inspiration to give you a sense of this would be enough.
Exactly. Okay, well, that's easy enough. And then the last thing is that your design deliverable is going to be due at the end of the semester. So again, looking for your thoughts and input here. The end of the semester is crazy. But knowing that this is part of a class project or a capstone project, is it going to be crazy if we say like December 15th, like the end of your semester? Would you rather it be due in the end of November or the early January? Like what's going to stress you out the least? Because we're pretty open.
So from the UMass side, the beginning of December fits in with our academic schedule and their deliverables. But I will leave it up to the student teams to see if they want to tweak that forward or back.
So Rami, can my guys provide you with their feedback later in an email? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Because they've had to leave just now, for the bus. They were coming home.
Understood. Yeah, no, that's fine. Like I said, if you have thoughts, send them to me. We're going to be starting to put together our review panel, and I'm trying to lock down some details.
Yeah. As soon as possible, we'll provide you with their preferences.
John, did you have thought?
I think the same. I'd like to consult with our students. We've got one here on the call, but I think they'll be meeting Monday night and we can discuss this.
Okay, that sounds great. Kathy, thank you I didn't even know that you joined us, but thanks for joining us. Did you have any thoughts on that? I know came in a little late.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, very interesting information. Love it. And so no further thought.
Okay, well, we will we'll take any thoughts and feedback that you give us, and we will send out an example prior to the next informational webinar and have a deadline set before that informational call so that we know what we're working for. But really the inspiration for all of this was this dream that somewhere on the Repowering Schools website, we would have a page that's like, hey, you want a renewable energy demonstration project at your campus? Here are a couple of DIY examples. So the idea being that you could take this design that you've come up with and hand it to anybody that was interested in a solar and wind powered billboard system that charges your cell phone at their school. And you've got pretty not generic, but easy to follow schematics, a parts list, some general costs, and any other details that you would basically hand to somebody and say, go ahead and install this. And so we're looking for, as much detail as you can give us so that anybody could go and pick up this idea and install it on their campus within reason, of course. Ian or Charles, did you want to chime in on if I, didn't explain that the way we were thinking?
Yep,
No, I
I
think-
think that makes sense.
You got it.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I appreciate all of you. I will make some notes of what's on the list and we will be in touch. So just keep working on those projects and John and Sam, I'm happy to meet with you guys to help progress the project there at JMU in any way I can help.
Just
Awesome.
like a
Thank
quick
you, Remy.
Just a quick question about the panel, like reviewers. How does that kind of work at the end of the semester once this design process is done?
So basically, and again, Charles and Ian, feel free to chime in on this, but my thought process is a couple of folks who understand and know about hybrid systems and design that will basically look over your plans and all of the documentation that you've come up with and give you feedback. So it's not like a grade, it's not like a pass fail, it's more of like, that looks good, and we would be comfortable having you move on to that next stage of implementation in the spring if you wanted to go there. So it's more of just like making sure you're not electrocuting somebody or doing something very strange, but
and providing feedback to if you go into the next phase, just some ideas to think about to improve the design if needed. So.
And also it allows us to find the one that we think is the most accessible. So, to Remy's comments earlier, wouldn't it be nice if we had sort of an IKEA set of instructions for here's how you put something this small together? I mean, this is about as small as you can make it, right? I mean, you can't go less than one wind turbine. It's hard to go smaller than this size of wind turbine. You're not going to pair this turbine up with 5 kilowatts of solar. You're going to pair it up with a few hundred watts. So it's as small as you can get it. And then what does the IKEA set of instructions look like? And if you could make something like that said, here's where you get them, here's how much they cost, show to people that like, look, there's a few $1,000 and now you are zombie proof. Your cabin will always have power. Your phone will always be charged. It may not have a cell tower to talk to when the zombies take it down, but you can play your music. So that's
As long as you don't do Pandora.
Yeah, exactly. You have to download all the songs into Spotify. Yeah.
And it does, and there are a bunch of you doing a bunch of different things, which is fabulous. So there'll be a kit for schools that want to play with renewables. Will be another one for a kiosk or a picnic bench or whatever. And that's the idea, to get a bunch of different designs that people could implement.
Does that help, Jacob?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And then the last thing before we go is just know that at the next informational webinar, one of my goals is to be able to give you an overview of our plans for the DWEA 24 event. So last year we had students invited to the DWEA. This is a Distributed Wind Energy Association's annual conference in DC in February. And I think we all had a really good time, and we really appreciated the industry folks that were able to give feedback on the small wind turbine projects. So this year they are excited to have us back. And I just need to get a better understanding of what that looks like and take into consideration all your feedback from last year. Let's see if we can get more industry involvement. The biggest challenge being that DWEA was not able to secure that large space where we will be right next to them. So we're going to have to come up with some creative ideas on how we can be close and still intermix with them. They definitely still want us there for like networking, cocktail hour thing like we did last time. Just not sure how the speakers and other things are going to work. So we'll work on those details in the next couple months, and hopefully we'll have a good plan for you to get you guys excited to hopefully come. It's a horrible time of the school year to try to get out on a field trip, but it's only 2 days, and hopefully we'll be able to get some of you guys to come out, maybe different folks from your team that got to go to RE Plus or something. I don't know. Okay.
Hey, Remy?
Yes.
When in February?
It's the end of
Did you-
February. I don't know, Charles or Ian, do you know it? I
Okay.
think it's like the 24th or
20
the
yeah,
26th
24th.
or something.
Okay,
Tail end.
We'll
thanks.
have all those details next time, but yeah. Okay, guys, thank you. I will send out the recording and a follow-up email sometime next week.
Nice to see all you guys.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Remy. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
All right, I'm done, Ella.